The Democratic National Committee has released its official list of candidates for next month's debate in Houston. Only 10 candidates qualified to make the stage on September 12th. They are Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, Andrew Yang, Cory Booker, Beto O'Rourke, Amy Klobuchar, and Julian Castro. Because there are only 10 candidates, the DNC will only hold one debate. It will be the first time every top candidate will be on stage at the same time. Joining me now are Gabe Debenedetti and Dave Weigel. Gabe is a national political correspondent for New York Magazine, and Dave is a national political correspondent for the Washington Post. All right, gentlemen, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I have my popcorn ready. Dave, this is going to be the first time that Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren are on stage together. What can we expect?
Well, that's a good point, because Elizabeth Warren has a very long-running argument with Joe Biden about pretty fundamental things, about the role of government, about financial regulation. I wouldn't say they've been champing at the bit to debate him. I think they are ready, though. And the Warren people who have not been under pressure, really, from a serious candidate in the debate so far, are ready for perhaps Biden to emphasize that Warren used to be a Republican until the 90s. They might bring up her legal work. They're pretty girded for a fight that I think they were okay with not having to debate Biden in the summer. They're pretty ready for it now, with more people viewing her favorably.
And I mean, Gabe, you could not have, as Dave alluded to, sort of two candidates more different on the ideological spectrum, representative of different wings of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because these are the two major candidates that we haven't really seen going head-to-head so far. So there are a lot of Democrats sort of waiting to see what this would look like. But I think one of the really interesting dynamics here is that they've actually been going head-to-head in different ways, whether it's on Capitol Hill, in hearings, or in other fora for decades now. Obviously, Joe Biden was a senator, and Elizabeth Warren was an advocate who would come to testify regularly. And then you'll remember in 2015, when Joe Biden was considering running for president in that election, he actually essentially tried to make Elizabeth Warren his running mate. Right. So they have a bit of a complicated history, but I think that they've been sort of shadow campaigning for a long time now. It'll be really interesting to see how the dynamic changes when they're actually, facing off one-on-one.
Yeah, literally like side by side there. Well, right. Dave, with Senator Kirsten Gillibrand dropping out Wednesday, the Democratic field is now down to 20 candidates. 10 will be on the debate stage in Houston, but another 10 will not. So what's next for that group?
Oh, even that group you can split in a couple of different ways. There are candidates who are not picking up a lot of traction, or not likely to, like Wayne Messam, who has not really had a campaign event in a couple months. There's Tim Ryan, who talks about momentum, but would need to decide by December whether he's running for his House seat or whether he's continuing. So I think you're going to see Tulsi Gabbard and Tom Steyer, the people who were cut out, I shouldn't say cut out. People who very nearly made this debate, had there been a couple more positive polls. I think it's pretty likely they'll make the next debate, and you'd see another perhaps two nights with 6 candidates each situation. None of them are dropping out. I mean, Kirsten Gillibrand had made an investment in digital ads and Iowa and New Hampshire ads, and frankly, just rolled the dice and came up snake eyes, because there were not polls of those states, and much less polls that showed her hitting 2%. No one else is in that position in terms. Tulsi Gabbard needs 2 more polls. Tom Steyer needs just 1 over the next 30 days. They'll probably get that.
Yeah, I mean, so Gabe, what about that? Because you have the same set of criteria here to be eligible for the October debate. So who are we looking at here for the enlarged group for October?
Yeah, I think that Dave is exactly right. We're really looking at Tulsi Gabbard and Tom Steyer. Yeah. We don't actually know what the number of polls is going to be between now and then, or when exactly the cutoff is going to be. But Tom Steyer really only needs 1 more qualifying poll. So the way that this works, of course, is that candidates need to hit a certain threshold that the DNC has set. There are others who could be conceivably in this group. Marianne Williamson, for example, might make it if there are enough polls. It's a big if at this point. But, people who are watching the race from the overall dynamic perspective are trying to see if anyone else is going to drop out, as you alluded to. But you have people like Tim Ryan, John Delaney, Steve Bullock, people who have not made as much of a wave, not as many waves as some of these folks who are going to be on the debate stage. They've all said today and yesterday, we're not dropping out. Stop asking us this question, essentially, because they want to make this next stage.
Right. So, Dave, let me ask you about Elizabeth Warren and crowd sizes. For those who do not know, she hosted events in Minnesota and Seattle that drew 12,000 and 15,000 people, respectively. In the latest edition of your newsletter Tuesday, you dig into the idea of whether these crowd sizes really matter. So, what's the verdict?
Well, we've not been in a situation like this in modern Democratic history, where 2 candidates, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, can draw arena-sized crowds. You had Obama could do it in 2008, Bernie could do it in 2016. They otherwise got to play around with the fact that the so-called frontrunner wasn't drawing as many people. That's different now, and unlike Hillary Clinton, who I think was pretty wide open about the fact that she was not getting as many people at her events as Barack Obama or Sanders, Joe Biden's convinced that he's the most popular candidate in the race. He gets big crowds. He'll refer to his own poll numbers. I don't think that the Biden campaign per se is rattled by this. I do think you have, if you are them and want to see the left-wing vote get split, it's positive for you. If you're them and you can see a consolidation, maybe now is too early to worry, but you do see genuine excitement that might have been seen as impossible for Elizabeth Warren just 4 or 5 months ago.
Yeah, and it is interesting to think about this in terms of a metric as we try to figure out what is the meaning of this at this point in time. Well, Gabe, in your latest piece, you analyzed Joe Biden's so-called enthusiasm gap. Explain what the term means and how big of an issue that might be for Joe Biden.
Well, it's sort of one of these terms that I think is a little bit of a myth because we hear about it constantly as if it's this big problem that campaigns have where they have a lot of people voting for them, but they may not be totally enthusiastic about voting for them. Maybe myth is too strong a word because clearly it is something that Joe Biden is going to want to fix. But the reality here is that while he is leading in the polls, a lot of the people who are saying that they're going to vote for him or that they would vote for him right now are sort of, they like him, but they're not 100% in on him. And he's going to have to persuade them to eventually actually vote for him. But I think the most important dynamic here is really the difference between national polls and state polls. And Dave talks about this a lot correctly, I think. But there's not a national Democratic primary.
Right.
There are a series of state primaries and caucuses, of course. And Joe Biden is doing much better nationally than he is in Iowa or New Hampshire, for example. Yeah. So there is a gap there that he's going to have to work on. But when you see these massive campaign rallies for the other candidates, you see that there is a lot of enthusiasm for them. And Biden is basically making the bet that that doesn't really matter.
All right, before we let you go, I also want to ask about Georgia. Now that Senator Johnny Isakson is announcing his retirement, the state will have 2 Senate races in 2020. Dave, do Democrats have candidates to try and take those seats?
Yeah, they don't have a sure-thing candidate who'd go in and clear the field. They do have people who have run in the past. We thought about running like Michelle Nunn, who lost a single-digit race in 2014, like John Ossoff, who ran a strong but losing race for Congress. There's going to be a primary for that seat. Stacey Abrams, I think, would like if people stopped asking if she could run. But the state is going to be targeted by Democrats in 2020 unless something changes. If they're not targeting it, it means that the map has gotten worse and they're focused elsewhere. There's going to be a ton of money in the state, and it is a place where candidates who, as Abrams did, appeal to suburban voters are going to be in the hunt for that district, for that seat, I should say. And also, it's a jungle primary. So if they do not clear the field, if Republicans don't clear their own field, you're probably looking at a Georgia runoff at the end of 2020 in a very changed state, a very different state than the one that had a runoff after the 2008 election where Democrats stayed home. I mean, it could be on the table for a while.
For a while. How do you see things shaping up for Georgia in 2020, Gabe?
Yeah, I think Georgia is going to be one of the big battleground states unless things change pretty dramatically, especially now that there are 2 Senate races there. Very similar, actually, to what happened in Arizona last cycle, where there were 2 Senate races there. These are actually the 2 states that Democrats are trying to expand into the most. So the more data they have, more opportunity they have to spend money and throw real resources at these places, they're going to feel more seriously about the opportunities there moving forward on the national scale.
Yeah, right. Times are certainly changing, it would seem. All right, Gabe Debenedetti and Dave Weigel, thank you both very much.